I believe that the time that we're living in this moment requires that I do so now. This year, the year of a pandemic, here in a different place in our service, before we recite the Unetana Tokef prayer, in the midst of terrible challenge, a pandemic that has taken about 200,000 American lives, those of us together today have to say that we are lucky. We're fortunate that we are alive. It's not easy. I do know some of you have been struggling and are struggling. There's been sickness and death in our own families. I know adults who have lost adult children, and I know children who have lost their parents. You have friends who have perished in this pandemic. And others, most are struggling with anxieties, depression, fears, addictions, abuse. These are really, really hard times. And I'm sharing with you my sermon at this point in the service because I really believe that it belongs here. This day has great power in our lives, even during a time that we would refer to as being normal, and how much more so now. It has much more power because it mirrors the most essential and the existential challenges of life itself. Who would have guessed that we would be meeting this way on Rosh Hashanah 5781? Of all the things that could have happened, I don't think we would imagine that we would be sitting separate with so many alone at this moment that's the highlight of the communal life of our congregation, the High Holy Days, a day of judgment. These have been days referred to as our tribal reunion. And we know the feelings that accompany this when we gather together in our synagogue. But this year, we are in this global pandemic. It's much weightier than other years, and it's much more confusing. I've been a rabbi for nearly 4 decades, and I've never seen so much tsaros, pain, sickness, confusion, and death. And I'm certain that's true with almost all of you too. And although most of us here are safe, we live in our little bubbles and are relatively comfortable most of the time, when 200,000 people die and hundreds of thousands more have been very, very sick, we know this is not normal and that we're able to kind of create a protection for ourselves and the world around us. It's hard to fathom. It's really hard to fathom. And so what we do is we create all sorts of distractions, defenses, barriers, and we need to. We need to when we talk about 200,000 Americans dying in about 6 months. And we've been challenged in other profound ways to think about the meaning of our lives as Americans, as American Jews, during a time of social upheaval. We're witnessing extraordinary social upheaval. The challenge that is being felt by Black Americans whose lives matter, and all Americans, the great need for accessible health care, a response to poverty, the realization that the warnings about global climate change are now not warnings anymore, as people and property are being incinerated and others are underwater and drowning. I can feel as if we are on the eve of destruction, if I would allow myself to go there. A broken political conversation that's filled with lies and conspiracies and dysfunctional leadership all add to horrific angst. I ask myself, and I asked myself this for weeks, is it not my primary responsibility to fill this moment with hope and with dreams? And that was my first inclination. I will try, through the context of this, to bring some hope and appreciation for our own lives and where we're at. I know there have been religious leaders and religious communities that have operated in such a way, and we have seen how so many of them have facilitated the spread of the virus and perhaps responsible for death themselves amongst their parishioners and people in their communities. This time calls upon us to be real. This time has called upon us to follow science and data and respond accordingly. We will emerge from this. I say that partially because I have trust in the great scientists and medical people in this country. But I also say that because we have seen devastation in the past. We have experienced plagues and tyrannical rulers. We have been put into fiery ovens, and we have seen redemption follow. We have tasted the worst of times, and we have also experienced glorious moments. And we have to remember that, and that is an expression of hope. My sense is we have never had a high holiday as dramatic as this for certainly those of us born after the Shoah. We do remember Yom Kippur 1973 that brought our people together. We feared the darkest possibilities, but we continued to blow the shofar. We heard its cry, and we emerged from that with a sense of faith. Challenge and troubles have never relieved us of our responsibilities in a world where randomness and disease and evil threaten. In fact, it's because we will not be relieved of our obligation to continue as a community and to pray together and to pray to God and to stand in judgment that we are here under difficult times. And though being apart, we've come to appreciate the power and the meaning of being together. We see clearly the need for strong and thoughtful and honest leadership and institutions, including this one. And that is why we are not in this room. That is why we close down early. And that is why we will not open to the public until it is safe. We care about every one of our members. We know how many elderly people are amongst us. We will not disappoint, nor will we compromise their health and their lives. So can Rosh Hashanah help us in other ways? Is this day merely to be a distraction from what's going on in the world? Or can we find a message in it that enriches and inspires? If I were to ask you, what do you think the most important idea or prayer or image of Rosh Hashanah is? I'm sure that many of you would mention the prayer that we're about to do and the metaphor of the book of life. You know, the prevalent greeting on this day is L'Shana Tova Tikatevu. May you be inscribed, may you be written for a good year. It refers to the central prayer of this day in Yom Kippur, the prayer that will be recited when I am finished, Unatana Tokef. And it goes like this. Let us speak of the sacred power of this day, profound and awe-inspiring. The great shofar will be sounded. A still, small voice will be heard. Angels will be alarmed, seized with fear and trembling, declaring, this very day is the day of judgment. All that lives on earth will pass before you like a flock of sheep. Passing before God like a flock of sheep. It can sound comforting, right? Pastoral, like the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But it can also make us feel as if we have no agency in this world. It can evoke images of terror, like waiting in line, forcibly in line, fearfully in line, trembling before walking into a gas chamber. I learned of another image for this. Particularly, I believe this image is appropriate for this time in our nation. Let me share it with you. There's a cursed place off the coast of Ghana, and there is a slave castle, a dungeon there. It still stands. It was a place where men and women who were to be sold like sheep were brought as they were being transferred as part of the slave trade after they had been sold off by tribal leaders to white men who were bringing them to America. And we might, and uncomfortably we might say and admit, that was part of the building of America. And those to be brought were placed in cells, and when the ships arrived, they were walked, shackled in chains, in an underground corridor through a tunnel, one by one, to the ships. Now there were holes above that tunnel. And looking from above into the holes were taskmasters. And they would view the shackled, impoverished African people on their way to enslavement in America. And as they walked one by one could ask, who will live and who will die? And looking through the lens of history, we ask the question, not just today, but who by fire and who by water? Who would be stoned to death? Who would be suffocated? Who would be lynched? It's an image of horror that we have to confront. And the prayer continues, you will review, number, and count, judging each living being, inscribing their destiny. The prayer is about the human condition, and it's about horrific moments in human history. Who shall live and who shall die? We don't know what this year is going to bring for any of us. We've done better with the virus, but there are predictions from the experts that it's going to spike again, perhaps as bad or worse than what it has. I know so many of you have difficulty with this notion of standing before God and being judged when it is seen as a proclamation of divine reward and punishment, because it seems to say you do good and you'll be safe, you'll be written into that Sefer HaChaim, the book of life. And that's not always our experience, we know that. But it's not what it says. It has to be seen in a different way, and that is, you and I, all of us, are writing our book of life. Each one of us has a book. We're given the book when we're born, and the book becomes our record. We record it with our words. We record it with our deeds, with our kindness, our charity. We write in it with our cruelty, with our misdeeds and our mistakes, and the unfortunate words that we speak. We write our own book. The first paragraph in Unetana Tokef reflects early Christian writings about the Day of Judgment. That's the day you die. But our Day of Judgment is an annual event. This is Yom Hadin. In fact, we could say that not only do we have an annual Day of Judgment, but if you look carefully at our liturgy, we see that we're called upon to look at ourselves daily. And our capacity to be honest, our ability to be self-reflective, our willingness to judge ourselves, that's necessary, and that can lead to our repair. It can lead to our return. It can lead to improvement. But we have to be courageous in doing that. Nevertheless, some will live and some will die. That's the reality that once in a while we're forced to face and think about. This day does that to us. And it reminds us that we can make a difference. You know, we are the only living beings that live with the consciousness that one day we will die. We don't like talking about that, and we have even more difficulty thinking about our own deaths. But when we do, we consider life's most important truths. When we think about the fact that our time is limited, we attempt to use our time more wisely. We don't have forever. It makes us conscious of how we are impacting others and how we will be remembered. For some, it gives them a desire to eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow they will die. But for others, it calls for some self-restraint, wanting to live as long as we possibly can. But we're being told something else here. We're being told that we will make meaning of this by virtue of the book we're going to write, the book of your life. It's open. So careful reading of the prayer is a preferred reading. It sees each one of us as the author of the book. It's not that we will be rewarded or punishment in a type of theological tit for tat. Rather, it's about the fact that there's a universal force. We can call it God, bigger than any one of us. And you know what? We're a part of that force. And so what we do in the universe matters. We write the book. Some of us will live and some of us will die. What do we do in our book of life? For some, when eyes are open to the realities of these days, we see before us what is really important. That's been one of the many so-called silver linings. We realize just how important our children and our parents, our grandchildren and our grandparents and our friends are to us. And we've come to realize just how important the community is to us. Those phone calls that have been made, the letters that are written, the emails, they've made a difference in the lives of people. We considered what we did with our time and what we do with our time. We thought about the things that we need and that which is superfluous, and how we have so much, we have too much. Perhaps we've considered that. And we've looked outside and realized how beautiful the natural world can be. And then the prayer lists all the ways that we live and die. It ends with the question of who will live a long life and who will come to an untimely end. Who will perish by fire? Who will perish by fire? And we look to the west coast of our country. Who by water? And we think of the people who live along the Gulf Coast and our own situation. Who by the sword? I think of my youngest son's roommate and one of his best friends who wrote a piece that was entitled something like, "I risk my life because I drive while black." And who by hunger? More people are receiving food aid, more people are hungry in this country than ever, any time in modern America. Who by plague? Who will die in this pandemic? None of us can possibly know. And so the question that we live with is the question of how do we live in this world? How do we live in a world where we don't have the type of control, of agency that we want and have let ourselves believe that we had? We don't control it all. And that may be the most fundamental religious question of all. It may mean that we have to turn to the individual acts that we're capable of and also understand the spirit within. I'm both grateful and I'm worried that we live so well. We live in such beautiful homes. We have so much. We have it all. So why am I worried? Because if the book of life has chapters about our success, it also has chapters that include the question what it is that we do forever for others. You see, it's very easy to lose empathy when we are comfortable, and we can't. We can't. We're responsible for each other, not just our families, not just our own people. We're responsible for all citizens, for all people. This day is not about me. This day is always about us and the world. This day is about all of humanity. The pandemic has not chosen people because they're Chinese or Asian or they're black or brown or white. It has chosen people because they're human beings. So we need to consider, even on this so-called Jewish New Year, the day that the world began, that all people are standing before God on this day. It's in the language of the prayer, Kol Ba'ei Olam, everyone who is part of this world. The traditional language of response is meant to help ameliorate the pain of these questions of life and death. And that response that ameliorates the pain of these questions is teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah transform the harshness of the decree. It's not saying that these things will save you. It's not saying they're going to prevent you from disease or from dying. It says the harshness of the destiny can be transformed. And we've seen that. Stuff will happen. Some things will be self-inflicted. Some things are a matter of genetic inheritance. Some things are just damn bad luck, accidents, and there's randomness. And some things are going to happen because evil resides in our world. But let's talk about those three things that can ameliorate the harshness. The first one is teshuvah. And teshuvah is about returning to a path that matters. We all have an ideal self. It's not that we're perfect, but we can be good. And we all move away from that path, but we can come back. And when we walk on that path, life is different for us. We feel a little bit more whole. We all want to be good. Good spouses, good parents, good children, good members of our community, good members of the shul. In these days, we've seen the stresses of living together with family, being cooped up in the same space. And at times we've lost patience, and at times we've expressed a lack of gratitude for those whom we love and those who need compassion the most. These days have also seen others amongst us crying out for consideration in their lives. Our teshuvah then isn't just about ourselves for ourselves. It's about bringing ourselves to others. And as we're called as individuals, we can also hear a call of a society. What have we done? What have we done after seeing pictures of children in cages, the children of immigrants? What have we done? How have we responded to the racism we know exists in our society? I only ask that we do what we can do, and I also ask that we be as knowledgeable as possible about the conditions in our society, about what our nation does. And so we have to stand up against those things that have created such pain and destruction of life. We have to stand up against hatred and haters. We have to stand up against the rampant anti-Semitism. We have to stand up against the misogyny we see. We stand up against racism. The virus has taught us about the interdependence of all people. This congregation, we have so much to be proud of because we responded incredibly well. As soon as we knew that people were quarantined in their homes, we had 80 people calling 1,500 homes regularly. We had people getting masks to other people. We had someone bring a shank bone before Pesach to an elderly woman who was so concerned that she didn't have one for her Passover Seder. We've collected food. We've collected clothing. It's been an incredible response, a realization that we are responsible for our brothers and sisters. And as I mentioned already, it's very clear that we're at a frightening moment in the destruction of the natural world and what that will mean for us if we don't stand up to protect our environment. During this pandemic, we have learned that we can live with less, and we have to. Have not we learned that greed and the need to own and to control causes destruction? Yet there are things needed to be done too by individuals. More importantly, though, a governmental response, global efforts are necessary, and we have to be part of those global efforts. We'll make a difference on November 3rd or when we vote by mail, and we're called upon to do that. This is part of a necessary teshuvah. It's a necessary teshuvah to heal the world. We have to return to that which is godly and that which is good, to the path that affirms life over death, order over chaos. And tefillah, well, we've spent a lot of time alone, And it's given us time to listen to our souls and our hearts and how important that is. It's also allowed us to reconnect with our community and the services we provided on Shabbat and how beautiful that is. In moments of fear and despair, we need connection. In moments of fear and despair, we need hope. And perhaps it comes when we offer a prayer that allows us to give voice to gratitude for what we have, and in so doing, connect us to something larger. Tefillah is both expressive and self-reflective. It is a gift to be able to slow down, and so we listen to our hearts. And finally, tzedakah. And you know that tzedakah contains a notion of giving and charity, but tzedakah in its essence is justice. Tzedakah comes from tzedek. It's our obligation to pursue, and it will be pursued. For thousands of years, our tradition has told us to pursue justice. As challenging as any one of us may have found these days, our pursuit of justice will remind us that a society that's based on tzedek will not neglect the hungry, the sick, the elderly, the poor, or the young, those who are on the edges of society. Tzedek tells us that they are our responsibility, and our society is judged by the way we treat those on the edges of society. So we have to ask ourselves, what will our book of life say? Unetana Tokef then loudly proclaims to us that we shouldn't get stuck in the past. It's really beautiful. For on the next page of the prayer, it says, God is ready to accept us if we wish to be the change that these days call for. He accepts us. He embraces us. He welcomes us home. He accepts our teshuvah. And it says God, because it says God doesn't desire the death, but rather that we change our ways. Has there ever been a time like these for people to note these words, the need to change? And then Unetana Tokef ends by saying the words that are chilling. We come from dust, and to dust we will return. We are withering grass, passing flowers, fading clouds, a vanishing dream. It is the reality of being mortal. But if we link ourselves to a God who loves and commands love, responsibility, justice, and mercy, then we attach to that which is eternal. And our names will live on through the book we leave to our children and to future generations. We are writing chapters in a book that contain hope and beauty, kindness and forgiveness. I'm hopeful as I look out here that next year we'll all be here together. I can picture it. I can picture our large, beautiful sanctuary in the Wiener Cultural Center filled with our beautiful people, young and old, singles and couples and families and babies and children and more children and the elderly and everybody in between, and our arms will be around each other. And we'll feel our connection and our openness. We'll sing together. We'll sing the song of life. We'll sing a song of peace. We'll sing a song of hope. We will sing the songs of inspiration. May this year see you healthy. May this year see you strong, becoming the better self that you can be, with your eyes open to the world and the needs of the people of this world, with your eyes open to the natural world and the needs and the cry of Mother Nature. May you work for that which is good and just. May you give love, and in so doing, may you feel loved. May you be inscribed and sealed for Shana Tova. May your book of life see 5781 as a chapter when we rejoiced as the world began to heal. You know how I end all the letters I send to you, to my congregants? See you in Shul. I hope to see you in Shul. Shabbat Shalom. Good Yom Tov and Shana Tova.